Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly.
And I'm King Newbie, Matt Freeman.
Hey, Matt, where are you going with all those knives?
The basement.
Why?
Oh, you'll see. What the hell is that?
I don't know.
Well, I guess let's just move on.
This week on the show, we complete Salem's Lot. The Lot Quartet loses 2 more members, but manages to defeat the evil vampire Barlow. Then, in the epilogue, Ben and Mark return to set Salem's Lot ablaze. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading and this book's ending?
I loved it. Thought it was a good ending. Thought it worked. Thought it fit. Thought it all came together nicely. I made some predictions that came true. Made some predictions that didn't come true. Missed some predictions that probably could have made if I thought about it. And yeah, I was very satisfied. I was very satisfied by it.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'll be thinking about this book for some time.
That's good. It's always good when you leave a book still thinking about it, I think.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I did enjoy, like, you would basically convince yourself, I think, from very beginning of the book, at least as soon as we kind of saw our team developing, that there was no way that anyone but Ben and Mark were going to survive it. And like, I was hesitant to push you on that because I didn't want to like draw more attention to that as a prediction than we already had. But I do think it was interesting. You would just basically 100% decided that everyone else was going to die. And you were right. Yeah,
I guess it just seemed to me like that kind of story, you know? I mean,
yeah.
I did know Callahan was going to make it, but only because of a very sort of bizarre circumstance.
Sure.
And everyone else, I was like, these don't seem like people who would leave. And if they did leave, then there would need to be some explanation for why they're not with Ben and Mark. So yeah, that just made more sense.
I think it's a combination of just story awareness, and then I think knowing that Callahan makes it out of here. Also, I think maybe kind of like, well, King's not going to do that with multiple characters, right? Like, he's not going to have 2 characters independent of each other escape town under some weird circumstance. So like, it was never looking good for Susan or Jimmy or Matt. But you were right on the mark with all those.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only way that would have made sense would be if we had some theme of like cowardice and abandoning your duty and stuff. And then maybe you could imagine like a lot of important characters bailing. I mean, it's interesting because we actually do have the sheriff also bailing.
Yeah.
That he's not so much of a main character.
But he is part of the town's, the structure of the town's inability to actually solve its own problems.
Yeah.
All right. So right before we get into this week's reading, we have a few quick announcements. I promise there will be less announcements than last week. I think those are like 15 solid minutes of announcements when I was going through the editing. I was like, holy shit,
dear.
We talked about too much. I think first what we just wanted to say real quick is we closed our entries to the Do the King Thing short story writing contest last Thursday. And wow, we had just under 40 people submit stories, which is like the most we've ever had for one of these contests. So we're kind of just like blown away and taken aback that there were that many responses. We really appreciate it, guys. Right now, what we're trying to figure out is exactly how we're going to handle the voting, because our original plan and what we've done with all our other contests is we just kind of put the artwork or the stories up to our patrons and let our patrons vote. The problem is asking our patrons to read just about 40 stories is a lot. So we're kind of trying to come up with some way of doing this and still making it fair and equitable and also feasible. So if you have submitted, you should have gotten an email from me thanking you for your submission. That's like basically your way of confirming that, yes, we got your submission. Yes, you are on the list. If you submitted something and didn't get that, please email us right away, kingslingerspod@gmail.com, because it means I missed you somehow, and we'll figure out what's going on there.
Yeah.
But we're going to figure it out. Thank you guys for being patient. Patrons, if you're like sitting there, where are the stories? We want to read them. We're working on it. We'll have an update for you hopefully soon.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the fact that 40 stories times 2,000 words is 80,000 words. So
that's like a book.
That's like a book. Y'all wrote a book. So thank you and congratulations and wow. Yeah, we'll just so that y'all aren't thinking like, what are they going to do? Probably something involving randomizing which stories people read and then giving them a chance to vote on the subset that they have read, and then you
Yeah.
end up with a kind of statistically robust voting procedure there without asking anybody to read 80,000 words.
Yeah. I was just thinking back to the first of these contests we did, which was a fan art contest while we were reading this web serial Worm, and Matt actually submitted an entry to that contest just because we were terrified there would be no entries, so we just like submitted one, and we were not going to like let you win. It was not. We just wanted to be able to at least say, "Oh, we got one entry."
Yeah.
And so to go from that to this is just absolutely wonderful. We really appreciate it, and we're not done. We're going to keep doing these. You guys seem to love them. We're going to keep doing them. Maybe sometimes we'll switch it up and do art contests to let our non-writers but artists create some stuff too. But we love this stuff. We hope you guys do too, and we can't wait to begin the process of figuring out which one of you guys won.
Yeah, and of course, just to say it again, our patrons are the ones who fund these contests. So we appreciate y'all.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Yeah. All right, one more quick announcement. Why don't you handle this one, Matt?
So this next week, we are doing a Doofcast episode on Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I believe this is our Council of Doof is forcing us to watch Eternal Sun. No, I love this movie, actually, and it'll be really fun to talk about it. I don't think we've ever talked about this movie.
I don't think we have. I love Charlie Kaufman, and I have a lot of things to say about Charlie Kaufman, so I think this is going to be a really fun episode. So this should be dropping this Friday. Please check that out. And Matt, related to that announcement, I want everyone that has an Instagram account to go to their Instagram right now and follow Doof Media on Instagram, because I kind of gave the keys to the Instagram to my wife over these last couple days, and she has taken it and run with it. She's doing all kinds of really fun things on Instagram stories. Like, she's just coming up with all these constantly fun and creative ideas, and I think it's fun. Like, for a while there, I was just posting our clips of these episodes and things like that, which are fun. But she's really trying to have some like actual content there. So if you have an Instagram, follow us there, and you'll see some fun stories and ways to interact and all that fun stuff.
It sounds good.
Thank you, Elise. She doesn't listen to the show, but I'm going to say it anyway. Thank you, Elise, for doing that. It's so fun. She's having a ball with it, and I'm loving seeing it.
Awesome.
All right, enough of the announcements. Get rid of that shit, and let's talk about some Salem's Lot. Matt, we begin chapter 14, part 39, and we're going to finish chapter 14. It took us 3 weeks, but here we are at the end of chapter 14. And Matt, this week begins with us saying goodbye to your namesake, Matt Burke, who dies of a second heart attack in this beginning of the chapter. And I really like, Matt, how King chooses to frame the scene and Matt Burke's death. We are introduced to Herbert / Harold, a former student that Matt Burke can't quite remember the name of, who came to visit his former teacher because he was worried about him. He thought he was sick or injured and wanted to come see how he was doing. And then this little kid, not little kid, but this younger man has to listen to his former teacher prattle on about Mommsen, Vermont, a town that just completely disappeared, just like Salem's Lot. Everyone disappeared, he told Herbert or Harold, who was listening with polite but not very well masked boredom. And I really like this, Matt, because I think the juxtaposition of this is really interesting. We have Matt, who's basically frantic. Like, he hasn't heard from Callahan. He hasn't heard from anyone, really. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know what's going on. He hasn't heard from them. And he knows exactly what Salem's Lot will become if he doesn't do anything. So he's freaking out. And yet, to this other kid, this random character we just met, it's boring. It's uninteresting. It's the kind of ravings of a madman, or like when my parents had their eyes glaze over when I started like explaining Pokemon to them when I was in 7th grade. You know, it's that kind of thing where it's just like, I know I'm supposed to care. I'm being polite, but I am completely uninterested in what you have to say.
Yeah, right. He doesn't understand anything of the magnitude of what's happening, and I guess it's interesting to be reminded that there are people in the town who are so completely oblivious to what's happening that, you know, this guy, not only is he zoned out, he doesn't even realize the relevance of this story to the fact that their town is being eaten alive right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a curse of having read a lot of books and having trope awareness to realize, like, as soon as this part started, basically, that Matt is a goner, because of, I mean, it's hard to put your finger on it, but it's this sort of like light waiting tone. It's like, what's happening in this scene? Oh, nothing appears to be happening in this scene. Oh,
yeah,
that's because something terrible is about to happen, right?
mm-hmm. I was thinking about that. Isn't it interesting? I don't know. So being this trope aware, reading as many books as you do you find that damages your enjoyment of stories in certain ways?
Maybe in some ways, but not really. No, I think that it just makes it fun to like notice where you are, and it's not like I'm never surprised. I'm surprised all the time. I honestly don't have a great track record in making predictions. I have and like part of it is that I'll make like insane predictions sometimes that make no sense, but it's like I'm matching some trope, but I'm matching the wrong trope.
Sure.
And I mean, I think that's what a lot of really good writers do is they'll put in red herrings in a lot of different ways. So like you're not really sure what's going to happen because you're not quite sure what tropes are at play, you know?
Yeah.
That's I wouldn't really say it bothers it harms anything. If anything, it gives me I think books become richer the more deeply you can read into them, and that's what trope awareness lets you do, I think.
Sure. I do think like there is a shift as you get older and the more stories you read where the surprise comes from. Like I think the reason why people love stuff so much that was the media they ingested when they were younger is because they didn't have this awareness. They didn't know all the stories in the world, and they weren't aware of all these things. So it was genuine surprise. Like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. Surprise. The thing that I kind of see more and more the older I get is my surprise is more, oh, I didn't expect this story to go there. It's not like, oh, this is a whole new thing that I've never experienced before. It's just, oh, this story is doing this thing that I did not expect them to do. And that's still surprise, and it's still enjoyable and delightful, but it is a different kind of surprise. I think this was in my mind just because so much of this book is talking about the difference between experiences in youth and experiences in adulthood, and kind of the way that fear manifests differently. And I think you want like the way you absorb media is just different when you're young and it's all new and as real as it could ever possibly be.
Yeah. And I mean, Stephen King is a super literary guy.
Yeah.
And he's writing books for people like himself. So I really think this is an appropriate conversation to be having here at the end of this book, more or less, because he's writing a vampire novel with tons of explicit references to Bram Stoker's Dracula and the vampire literature tradition at large. But he's also deviating very intentionally in a lot of places. And thus, you can never just cleanly predict what's going to happen because you don't know, okay, is this the spot where he's going to honor the Bram Stoker narrative, or is this a spot where he is modernizing it in some way that speaks to the specific themes he wants to talk about? And thus you're not, you're delighted when you come across something you recognize, but very often it's sort of subverted or done in a twisted way that you didn't expect, or it's just totally different because he's doing his own Stephen King thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I like that a lot. I don't know what else to say about it, but cool. No, I think that's, I don't know. I love thinking about this thing, and I think this book really does draw that kind of thought out of you for sure. Yeah. There's some parts of this book I don't like, but that is definitely one of the things I do really enjoy about it.
And just to, I mean, I know we're going on a tangent, but I feel like it's a very interesting tangent because this is Stephen King and this is the Dark Tower metaverse that we're tapping into. And the Dark Tower is also all about, we call it a genre pastiche, which it is. But what that really kind of means is it's playing with this really enormous color palette of tropes from different things.
Yeah.
And that really keeps you guessing. You never know what story you're in. You never know if is this a Western thing we're doing or a fantasy? Oh, it's both. It's a Western fantasy. What does that mean in terms of what tropes I can expect? And so it makes it more fun because there's more sort of toys for you to play with, but you're never quite sure how things are going to land.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the ways in which these books, like I think you said to me recently, like when I just like look at a summary of this book, it sounds insane. And that's because it is not it is not lining up to any particular genre trope thing. Like, we just watched Rango last week, a movie absolutely loved. We talked about it glowingly for about an hour, but that is very much a Western pastiche, and like everything that happens in that movie absolutely lines up intentionally with the tropes of a Western story. Dark Tower flirts with those and dives into them when it feels like, and then, you know, turns hard left when it wants to. And it makes it like a fascinating journey through all these genres. And I think the thing to me that King succeeds at so much is that would very quickly become something so huge and unwieldy. And I think the fact that he manages to tie it together with the central cast of characters is what makes the Dark Tower work. I don't know how we got on like an overall conversation about the Dark Tower again, but I'm not going to complain about it.
Yeah, I think that thing's going to come up toward the end of any book where you're retrospectively looking back over things. Sure. I will probably keep doing this as we go, honestly.
It's going to be a long episode, and I don't think you're wrong. But anyway, let's get back to Matt Burke, because he's about to die. A heart attack strikes him again, and he dies. But it's interesting, we see this little bit in his death throes that I wanted to talk to you about. Too soon, he thought. No, too soon. Pain smashing into him in waves, driving him down into darkness. Dimly, he thought, watch that last step. It's a killer. So obviously there's multiple ways you can read that last sentence there, but I mean, one of the most fun ways is in his death throes, did Matt Burke just like see Jimmy Cody's death or something?
Well, you know, honestly, that didn't occur to me in that moment because I didn't know that happened. But it's entirely possible that King was just drawing a poetic connection between the deaths of these two allies that we could, you know, notice in retrospect. But also, yeah, that's definitely what happened. He definitely had a vision. Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a classic Stephen King thing to do, right? Like in one character's death, he recollects or gets some sort of vision of another. I mean, you're right that like the way that the scene is constructed, he falls into death, like diving him deep down into darkness. Dimly, he thought, watch that last step, it's a killer, and then falling, right? So like it makes sense within the context that you correctly read it, but I think it's fun to also say, like, I don't know, these characters it's their quartet, right? They have some sort of connection, and perhaps in some way Matt Burke recognizes the danger that Jimmy is about to go under. And I mean, I do think it's poetic that kind of one of the reasons Jimmy dies, and we'll get to this in a second, but one of the reasons Jimmy dies is because the quartet again did not listen to the advice of Matt Burke, which was stop splitting up, stop doing that. That's a bad thing to do. And they didn't listen. Yeah.
I mean, I might be messing up an obvious timeline thing here, but for all we know, these two things happened at the same time. You know, so it could literally be like the psychic shock of Jimmy's death actually contributes to Matt's death. It's quite possible. I mean, there's not really anything in the text to say that exactly, but it's the sort of thing that I can imagine King doing.
I think you're right. I mean, I think the timeline, you're right. We don't know it explicitly, but I think it lines up pretty well that could be the case. And there is something rather poetic about, you know, the last two members of this group being taken out simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's harsh.
Yeah.
I really liked this line here. Is he? Herbert or Harold asked timidly. It was a complete question. That's such like that last sentence. It was a complete question. It's so good.
I love it. And then when I thought about it more, I thought this kind of, for me, links up with Let Be Finale of Seam. And maybe it's not obvious why, but for me, it's because English is super weird. But in pirate English, you would say, does he be? Instead of is he? Because that's how the to be verb works. And the answer is no, he does not be, he is gone. And so that connects to the Let Be Finale of Seam. It's like, no, he does not be anymore. He is actually dead now. He doesn't just seem dead.
No, I love that. That's great. Especially since we have the Emperor of Ice Cream returning again in this week's reading.
Yes.
That's great. Speaking, though, of Jimmy Cody, we catch up back with him and Mark Petrie. And turns out you were right all along, Matt. Barlow is in Eva Miller's basement. You just forgot about that one throwaway quote that she said earlier in the story, that her dead husband's pool table was stored in her basement. I can't believe you forgot about that, you absolute fucking idiot. I'm so disappointed.
Oh, Jesus, I fucked up. Oh, God. Speaking of, end of the book tangents, this might be an opportunity to mention one of the hard things about being like a first-time reader of anything, just in general. Maybe this happened to you when we were doing the Worm book. I don't know, but sometimes you just fucking space and you miss stuff. Like whether you're reading or listening, for me anyway, like if my mind loses focus for like 10 seconds and then comes back, I don't necessarily realize that I missed something. Like normally I notice pretty quickly, but I think every once in a while I probably do just lose a few seconds. Like I'm re-listening to Drawing of the Three. Actually, I just finished it. And I now realize that the blue plate, which I was so obsessed with, is just the china plate that Odetta's family bought for Odetta's aunt as a wedding gift. And then Detta was born when Odetta was hit in the head on the way back from that. So it's all like a straightforward plot connection between Detta and the plate. And I just spaced on the plate being the wedding gift. I didn't know that. That was nowhere in my brain. And so that's why I was so hung up on the fucking plate, because I spaced. And so anyway, I'm just mentioning this now because number one, finally fucking resolved the mystery of the blue plate. And number two, mentioning, I also think I just don't remember the reference to there being a pool table in the basement. So there you go.
I feel like it was like literally book 7. It was the Dark Tower when you were still like, and when are we going to figure out about this fucking plate?
I was.
And I was like incredulous and like, what are you talking about, Matt? It's just a plate.
I thought this was some sort of like origin story of Detta, which it actually was.
Yes.
It's just, it wasn't a secret. It was just like, that's, she was hit on the head with a brick. That's her origin story. We're done.
I do think you're totally right about, sometimes you just glaze over stuff 100%. I actually think the weird thing about reading versus listening is that your reading mind glazes over different stuff than your listening mind glazes over.
Yeah.
Like when I have infinite time, which is not always, I like to read the section and then also listen to it via audiobook. And the thing that I found that way is that there are always things that I notice that I want to talk about differently in each way. Like when I read through it the first time, I highlight, I take notes of things that I definitely want to, sections I want to pull and things I want to talk about. And then when I do have time to go back and listen to it, like I'll pick up on other things that I just yada-yada'd over in my reading somehow. It's really interesting that way. I don't know how you do what you do because I'm just not as good at catching stuff via audiobook. But I think actually to relate this to Stephen King, because that's what our show is about, he has said that he really does like listening to audiobooks because he finds that they allow him to see the story in a different way. So I think King would agree with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different experiences, honestly. I think they're both great ways to consume, but like some of the stuff that I love the most, I've read and listened to, and it's kind of different in great both ways.
Yeah. I just, for whatever reason, I can't listen to an audiobook like the first time. Like if I've read it before, I'll do that all day. Like I have the Lord of the Rings audiobooks and I listen to those like once a year. I have Dark Tower audiobooks and I'm always at some point in the middle of a Dark Tower book via Audible. Like I'm right in the middle of the Wastelands right now in my audiobook. But like new books, I can't do it. So I'm envious of your ability to do it and retain information, except for the blue plate.
Except for the blue plate. My only big mistake, I guess.
That's it. That's the only one.
Yeah.
I do think it's funny that like things like King did technically tell you about this pool table, but it's such a throwaway reference that honestly, like, I'd never expected you to actually remember it. Like your brain isn't wired that way to like clock, yes, pool table. Like
no.
You remember Eva Miller has a husband that died. You remember maybe even that a lot of his shit is still stored in the basement that she hasn't gotten rid of. And there's a throwaway line where she wonders if she can get Weasel to kind of help clear out the basement someday. And she's just kind of avoiding doing it. But to remember specifically that it's a pool table and then immediately connect those dots in that way, I don't think anyone, I mean, I'm not going to say anyone, but I think very few people would have actively done that during a first read.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say maybe it would be more likely if we had read it straight through, you know,
Sure.
or like a person reading the book straight through might just, it's just sitting there in the brain buffer rather than something that I read a week or 2 or 3 ago.
This is probably honestly like 2 months. We're on episode 11, so we're coming up on 3 months of this book.
So this would have been much earlier. Yeah. But I mean, there's definitely stuff I noticed while kind of blitzing through Drawing of the Three where I'm like, oh, I didn't make this connection simply because like point A was dropped in chapter 3 and point B was dropped in chapter 8, you know, and it's like I just couldn't have seen that in real time, which is fine. I mean, there are trade-offs when you do a show like this.
Many advantages of reading this way, but there are definitely some disadvantages for sure. I like this part here, kind of talking about our characters' extrasensory perceptions a little bit. He opened his eyes. I know where he is, he said. I know where Barlow is. He's in the basement of Eva Miller's boarding house. And it was true. He knew it was. It felt incontrovertibly right in his mind. So not necessarily like extrasensory, like white interference here, but I just love the way King writes. There's a lot of moments in King's stories where characters just know something and know that they know something. They like, there's no doubt, to the point where it like runs up to the line of they feel like they're being told this by some external source.
There's so much direct white interference toward the end that I actually feel like this is probably a suggestion of that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and again, it goes back to a conversation we had a few weeks ago just about characters. This is the stuff I mean when I say characters in King books, like almost get close to acknowledging that they're a character in a story, and therefore like when they know something, it's because like that's what's happening in the story now, you know, like it's just, it's never explicit except for in the Dark Tower, but it's just like it's almost as if Cody he realizes he's in a book right here, and it's like, oh yes, of course, it's got to be at Eva Miller's boarding house, because that makes sense thematically and narratively that it would be here at this place.
Yeah, right. If he's not, then the writer is really sloppy. But of course, Jimmy is not trope aware enough to know what's going to happen to him.
Yeah. So Jimmy and Mark decide that they're going to head right to Eva's. They briefly consider going to get Ben, but decide against it. They'll just go in and check out the house, and if Barlow is there, they'll have plenty of time to run back, get Ben, and then kill him. So somewhere, probably the afterlife, Matt Burke is screaming at them, "No, you absolute fucknuts! Don't split up the content again. Have you not been listening to anything that I've said?"
And I mean, no, they haven't. Yeah, I mean, when they decided they were going to go ahead without going back for Ben, I realized here, similarly in the trope aware sense, Jimmy's dead now. Jimmy's going to die when they go there. Yes,
it's just so perfectly set up, because like that's really been the drum that Matt Burke has been beating for the past 150 pages of like, he wants to split you up. Don't do this. You're stronger together. And it's literally not until Mark and Ben are the only two people left in the group that they go, okay, I think we're stronger together.
Yeah. Right. Sigh.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this line here. Ben's Citroen was still sitting in Eva's parking lot, now plastered with wet leaves from the elms that shaded the square of gravel. The winds had picked up, but the rain had stopped. The sign that said Eva's rooms swung and squeaked in the gray afternoon. The house had an eerie silence about it, a waiting quality, and Jimmy made a mental connection that was chilled by it. It was just like the Marston house. He wondered if anyone had ever committed suicide here. Eva would know, but he didn't think Eva would be talking. Not anymore. I love this idea that like Eva Miller's boarding house has become a new Marston house. Like you can kind of see it's literally the evil of the house up on the hill that's like expanding and creeping and taking hold of new buildings and new places. Yeah,
I love that. And now that the vampires has roosted here, he's sort of cursed it. He's brought that darkness here, and now the building will hold it, maybe forever. I don't know, but yeah, that's a great pull. And I think that the idea that there's now this lingering evil around Eva's rooms it persists in the background, kind of from here on, actually.
Yeah, definitely. So they walk into Eva's and head towards the basement. The lights have been turned off, so Mark goes and looks for a flashlight while Jimmy Cody examines the stairs leading down to the basement, and that's when, quote, the screams begin. So we'll find out in a few pages what happened here, right? Barlow has one last trick up his sleeve. He removes the stairs down to the cellar and replaces them with some upturned knives that Jimmy Cody falls down the missing stairs and impales himself on and dies. What I really want to talk about right now is King's choice to do it this way, right? We don't learn this information right away. The screams begin, and then we cut to Mark climbing out of the basement, soaked in blood. We know Jimmy's dead. We know it's traumatized him, but he holds this information from us. He hides it from us until later, until Mark is telling the story to Ben. It's a really interesting choice, isn't it?
It is. I think I love it. I mean, we know Jimmy's dead. We know it was bloody. We know that it was especially horrific somehow, but we don't know what happened. Mm-hmm. We don't know how Mark survived physically unscathed while Jimmy was killed. Like what happened? And this is to me another example of King understanding how did it happen is more interesting than the mere result. So he shows us the result, lets us worry, lets us imagine horrible things, sees the effect that it has on Mark, and only then do we see, do we understand what actually happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also a great way to emphasize Mark's like complete discombobulation at this event. Like he comes out of it and he's so shell-shocked, like he can't even process what just happened, and that's kind of why it's hidden from us, because he's not even able to think about it yet, and it's not until he's able to express it verbally to someone else that we get a clue as to what exactly happened. It's just a great way of emphasizing how it has damaged and almost destroyed him.
Yeah. I mean, this definitely feels like a line that Mark has crossed that he doesn't really come back from for the rest of the book. Yeah, definitely.
And here's a fun fact for you and those at home that might not know this. This death originally was way worse, Matt.
Uh-huh.
It was way worse. So
go on.
In an early manuscript of this story, do you remember how there was all those rats around the dump? There was just like thousands and thousands of rats, and Dud was constantly trying to kill them. And then one day the rats just vanished.
Uh-huh.
And we were like, that's weird. Where'd all the rats go? Well, they were originally in Eva Miller's basement waiting for Jimmy Cody, and they ate him. They ate him alive.
Okay.
And King wrote and described this in brutal, disgusting detail, and the original publishers of Salem's Lot said, nope.
Interesting.
We're not going to publish that. You have to change it.
I guess they didn't know who Stephen King was yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is only a second book, right? So he didn't have the clout he has now where he could say, no, we're doing the rat one. We're doing that.
Just did King manage to fit a rats eating people alive scene into any other books?
Well, not exactly. He does have a short story in his short story collection, Night Shift, which, by the way, is also the book that has the 2 Salem's Lot short stories we're going to read. So once you finish reading those, Matt, you can maybe go read this one. It's about a rat infestation in the cellar of I believe a laundromat company.
Excellent.
I think, and the group of workers tasked to clear out the rat infestation. It's wild.
A laundromat, you say? The place where King worked when he was younger.
Yes, indeed.
Excellent.
Indeed.
That's so excellent. It's funny because when you say that, it makes perfect sense, because we have the element of the rats in place. We have the element of the rats disappearing. We have Barlow specifically saying that he loves wolves and rats and creatures of the night. We have the fact that there's the horrible stench that seems to follow him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now I guess it's just that Barlow has this horrible stench. But it's kind of neat to imagine that maybe originally Barlow doesn't have a horrible stench. It's just that he always has the rats go where he's going to sleep so that they can act as a security system.
Sure.
Which is not in the book, but knowing this kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely like it. I mean, while I like the like moving the staircase and setting up the knives thing as a trap that illustrates Barlow's cleverness and his constant ability to kind of be one step ahead, I think the rats thing fits so much better. And it obviously, like, it is kind of like a dangling thing that is left when you just kind of excise it as King did. The rats stuff never pays off, really. It's just, where'd all the rats go? I mean, like, I guess if you wanted to, you could just say, oh, well, he ate them. He ate the rats. He's really hungry and he's eating all the rats. But no, that's not a vampire like Barlow. Like, that's not the type of thing he's going to do.
No, I don't think he would. Yeah, I think, and the night, I mean, just to be honest, this is one of the touches of the book that I didn't think was great. Like the idea of a missing part of a staircase. Like, I'm not going to fall for that. No fucking way am I going to fall for that. Like,
but he left a little bit of it so it looked like it was going down.
Yeah, but having walked on stairs in my life, I don't throw my weight forward without a hand on a rail and into pitch darkness. It's just not a thing.
Sure.
Yeah. And also the idea that that they're going to fall like on this exact square of space and be impaled is just kind of a stretch,
Yeah, I think I wonder how quick of a solution it was. Like, right, like you've got your finished manuscript, it's done, you've done your own personal edits, you've been arguing back and forth with the editors of the publisher probably for a couple weeks now, and you've acquiesced to a lot of changes, and then they just come to this one and they just don't budge. They're like, we will not publish this thing if it's in it, like, bottom line.
Yeah.
And you're like, fine, okay, what do I need to do? I need to solve this problem, and I need to solve this problem quickly.
You need to solve it quickly and in a way that doesn't require a whole bunch of like rejiggering of the surrounding text to justify and support it, right? So it's just like, yeah, he took the knives, and I mean, because that's the thing. He inserts like one sentence where it's like he didn't notice that the knives were gone. Mm-hmm. And then the knives are part of the trap. The end. That's it. Yeah.
Very quick and slightly inelegant solution. Yeah. Bring back the rats. Give us the Stephen King cut.
Yes. Give us the rat cut.
So that's Jimmy Cody. That's Jimmy Cody dead, Matt. He's dead now. So just for those of you keeping score at home, here's our score right now. Matt Burke, educator, representing knowledge's ability to defeat evil, is now dead. Father Callahan, priest, representing faith's ability to defeat evil, defeated and fled. And now Jimmy Cody, doctor, representing science's ability to defeat evil, also dead. So it's not looking good for, humanity.
It's not. But now we're left with the child and the artist, perhaps.
Sure.
And I was trying to figure this out. So the child, I think, brings something like innocence or purity or something of the spirit of childhood. I don't think King has a unrealistically rosy view of what childhood is, though. So I don't think it's just like, children are pure and all. It's like, no, because Mark has a healthy respect for the darkness. That's kind of part of the edge that he has. And then Ben, he's an artist, yes, but like he's an artist. I don't know what to do with that. Like it's just interesting to me that these are the two who end up, winning.
Yeah, I mean, and if like, I don't. Maybe one of our listeners can fill this in better than we can, but I don't see a clear line as to like why and or how they uniquely had the power to defeat Barlow, right? Like we're going to talk about the death of Barlow, which I do think is a great scene that I love so much, but like it's not as if they take their unique set of skills to defeat him, right? It's specific to a kind. I mean, I guess you could say that yes, they do, because it's a specific kind of belief, it's a specific kind of faith, it's a specific kind of goodness that is what is able to finally overcome everything. But I don't think the book exactly draws a line between that faith, that belief, that goodness, and Ben's unique qualities as a human being.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. Now that we posed this question, maybe we can work on it as we go through the end.
Sure. I think he's better to me at saying, here's the metaphor of the things that are failing, like the things. And I think specifically in many ways, these are the very things that were the reason why Dracula in Bram Stoker's novel was able to be defeated, specifically the science side of it, right? This was like, we used science and technology to defeat the evil, to drive out the darkness. And so these are kind of, it's kind of saying, no, this stuff is not good enough anymore. It doesn't work like we thought it would.
Yeah, sure.
This next passage is one of my favorite passages, Matt. This is Mark Petrie kind of losing it after the death of Jimmy. Suddenly, he shrieked. The sound came roaring out of his belly, up the dark passage of his throat, and through his distended jaws. He shrieked until he felt some of the madness began to leave his brain. He shrieked until his throat cracked and an awful pain lodged in his vocal cords like a sliver of bone. And even when he had externalized all the fear, the horror, the rage, the disappointment that he could, that awful pressure remained, coming up out of the cellar in waves. The knowledge of Barlow's presence somewhere down there. And now it was close to dark. That's just such good writing. Like the externalization of all the fear, the horror, the rage, and the disappointment. Like this is, as you said, this is Mark Petrie crossing a threshold.
Mm-hmm. I like the word disappointment in there, right?
Yeah.
Like you totally feel that. You even you as the reader, you're like, oh, this didn't need to happen, you know? This didn't need to be this way. And I think disappointment is a perfect word for it. It feels like too light of a word, but it doesn't at the same time. Like it feels like just the right word. But yeah, it means, go ahead.
No, I love the idea of, the way like he had to get this madness, this anger, all the stuff out of him, because it says like he shrieked until he felt some of the madness begin to leave his brain, right? Like he's got this stuff bottling up inside him that, maybe we can say the evil bottling up inside him that he gets out. But then it's externalized. Great, you've externalized it. And here is that external symbol of it is Barlow. Barlow is still being there. And almost as if to say this will never truly go away until you've defeated this evil. Yeah,
I like that. That's a connection I didn't quite make. Yeah, I like that a lot. Mm-hmm. I think that this is the exact moment where Mark fundamentally becomes the traumatized husk of a child that we saw in the prologue.
Sure.
Prior to this, even after his parents were killed right in front of him, he seemed grounded in reality and functional. But past this point, he seems to break down very rapidly until the end where he's semi-catatonic.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think you're right. But he pulls an Eddie Dean here, right? And he finds his steel. He finds the steel at the core of him. And I think there's even a line where it goes like he says, stop. Like he's about to lose it. He's about to fully go off the deep end. And then actually it's no. The steel in him came up. No. Like he's not going to let the madness take over. He's not going to let the destruction of this event destroy him. And so what does he do? He hops into a car and starts driving down the road. Mark Petrie, I think he's like 11, driving a car down the empty streets of Salem's Lot.
Classic Mark Petrie moment. And I love how there's this sort of like functional, okay, break the problem down kind of gunslinger attitude that overtakes him, where he's like driving the car using the memory of what his father would say, and he's almost in like a fugue though. Like it's not like, yes, he finds his steel, but also he's losing it even as he's driving the car, like he's kind of using all the tools he has just to kind of put one foot in front of the other, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, like he's holding on just long enough until he gets to Ben, and then like when he's with Ben, he's allowed to kind of collapse a little bit to tell him the truth of what happened. And that is when we get to see the full story.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, speaking of the Whites' influence on this whole thing, Ben and Mark just happen to bump into each other on the road, right? Like Ben's like, oh, wow, it's way later than I thought. I better go look for them. Oh, and they're right here. Hooray. Coincidence.
Yeah, right. There's definitely some increasing amounts of White interference. Sorry, just to kind of connect them. Like it makes Mark having a complete freak out and breakdown actually just kind of feels more right if he just saw a man get eaten alive by rats than it does if he just, I mean, it's still his friend dying in front of his eyes, but the rats thing just feels like much more of a thing that would break your mind. So,
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, seeing someone impaled by half a dozen knives, I think would be a horrifying experience that would change me from the rest of my life.
Sure.
But I do think it's just your brain does a thing where if you know the rats thing is there, then you're kind of like, he's overreacting about these knives a little bit.
It's just some knives, man.
Yeah.
We've all seen a man fall on a bunch of knives.
Yeah. I mean, in movies.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, they get back together and they decide that they need to go face Barlow, but first they're gonna call Matt and talk to the constable. And of course, when they call Matt, they find out that he's dead. And we'll get to the constable in a minute, but I want to talk about this bit here. Mark Petrie is on his last net leg, but Ben finally gets it and needs him there with him. And so much he needs him so much that he does this. And I want to talk about this with you a little bit. I am scared, Mark said, not rising to it. Aren't you? I'm scared, Ben said, but I'm mad too. I lost a girl I liked one hell of a lot. I loved her, I guess. We both lost Jimmy. You lost your mother and father. They're lying in your living room under a dust cover from your sofa. He pushed himself to a final brutality. Want to go back and look? So that's rough, right? Like, he's obviously pushing Mark here. He's pushing him to, with the brutality of that moment, to kind of spur his anger on, to stick with him and finish the job that they've started.
Yeah.
But I mean, why does Ben need Mark so much? Is it just the quartet of it all?
Well, I mean, sort of. Yeah, I think Ben, correctly knows that he doesn't have the spine or the steel or the conviction, or maybe it's like the goodness required to carry it through by himself. Like maybe he knows, like, I need the child there for what the child brings. Ben is bringing his own personal history into this, but just Mark is a part of this equation that can't be absent.
Sure. I like that. And he somehow feels that's the truth.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a matter of, hey, Matt Burke told us not to split up and I'm finally getting it. I think it's something more primal and elemental than that.
Right. And I don't think it's like cowardice. It's not like he's like, I'm too scared to go into the basement by myself. It's like he knows he has a very strong inclination bordering on certainty that if he goes by himself, then he's not going to make it. And then they're just doomed. Yeah.
I also like a little bit towards our continuing, hey, Ben didn't really like Susan all that much.
Uh-huh.
With the, I lost a girl I liked one hell of a lot. I loved her, I guess. And in the back of your mind, you're like, wait, didn't you tell her you loved her? Because I'm pretty sure you did that. It seems like you're just like, I mean, I know whenever I talk about my wife, I'm like, I guess I love her. I guess.
Refreshingly honest, Ben. Now talk about your alcoholism.
No, he's not gonna. Oh. I'm not gonna.
No, we're not gonna revisit that, are we?
Well, I think you and I will. I think next week's episode, the overview episode, is a really good place to kind of talk about that across the book as a whole.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
So they call the hospital and find out the bad news about Matt Burke, and this is it, Matt. They know that they're the only two left now.
Yeah. Ben receiving the news of Matt's death and passing it along to Mark is, for me, really an amazingly impactful moment. I think more impactful than the brief moment of Matt's death, because, when Matt dies, you're just like, yep, saw that coming. But then it actually hitting the characters, yet again, King takes the time to show the effect of a loss on the characters, and that just makes everything really hit and sink in for me.
Yeah, and I love the way it's written too. Like, he gets off the phone with him, walks over to Mark, and Mark says, Matt's dead, isn't he? Yes. Heart attack. How did you know? Your face. I saw your face. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then it was 5:15 is what immediately follows that. And so it's like, it's the real all hope is lost moment, right? Like, it's 5:15. The sun is going to set in like an hour and 45 minutes. Matt is dead. It's just the two of them now. Fuck.
Yeah. Yep. Nothing left to do. I mean, it's very rapidly approaching the end.
Yeah. So they make one last ditch effort to recruit some more help. They go talk to Constable Gillespie, who has surprisingly figured things out as well. He knows that they're vampires. He knows that vampires have taken over the town, but he doesn't care. He's leaving. And I just love this quote so much, Matt. Ben heard himself say remotely, "You gutless creep, you cowardly piece of shit. This town is still alive and you're running out on it. It ain't alive, Parkins said, lighting his smoke with a wooden kitchen match. That's why he came here. It's dead, like him. Has been for 20 years or more. Whole country's going up the same way. Me and Nolly went to a drive-in show up in Falmouth a couple weeks ago, just before they closed her down for the season. I seen more blood and killing in that first Western than I seen both years in Korea. Kids was eating popcorn and the cheering 'em on. He gestured vaguely at the town, now lying unnaturally gilded in the broken rays of the western sun, like a dreaming village. They'll probably like being vampires. So I mean, this is a lot, right? This is, like, once again, the authority, the law figure, the law and order figure saying, fuck it, I'm not going to be involved. I know what it is and I refuse to acknowledge it, and I'm just getting the hell out. But this rant he goes on here, I mean, obviously this is not a rant that King himself supports, because he's the same person that's writing the blood and the killing that Parkins is talking about here. So I wanted your take on this kind of rant Parkins goes on here.
Well, first of all, this is not the direction I thought we were going when we introduced these Haplon lawman characters at the start of the book. Like, this is some unusually direct social commentary, like I think you're suggesting. But of course, I don't think Stephen King thinks that violent Westerns are a blight on society. And no. I don't think Stephen King thinks that America is dead and that we should just give up on it and walk away. But I mean, I think it's an interesting thing to put in this guy's mouth. I don't think we're supposed to think this guy's right. I think this guy is prematurely giving up, right? I mean, obviously, because our heroes go on and they defeat the evil. And this guy's a gutless coward, like Ben says.
I mean, it's a really fascinating truism over the course of many lifetimes in this country that, like, it is true that the 70s were this time of incredible upheaval in the country. There was violence. We've talked about this a couple times throughout the book. But Parkins Gillespie seeing evil and then going, well, damn, kids like violent movies, so they'll probably like being evil. It's just absurd. I mean, it's the same kind of thing that happened in our lifetimes when terrible, awful things happened and we don't know how to explain it. We don't understand how to deal with it. And so we just seek something that has nothing to do with it to blame, right? This is Columbine and Marilyn Manson video game. Like this, it's a tale as old as time. This is just what happens over and over again. It's like, we don't want to face the evil. It's too hard. This is a continuation of the beat from last week where people refuse to look out their windows. It's too hard to acknowledge the core cause of the evil. And so we seek out entirely tangential things to blame. I mean, like, when you read it out loud, it really comes as like a complete non sequitur. Like, there are vampires taking over the town and you're bitching about kids watching violent movies? What the fuck is wrong with you? No, I don't think a kid who likes a Western is going to like being an undead creature of the night that feeds on other people. I don't quite think that is a valid connection there, guy.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
I think it does come off as blatantly ridiculous, and just like I don't know what else to add there. It's we're sitting here reading a book about horrible violence, and that doesn't mean we're like complicit in real world violence. That's
sure.
We're it's
silly.
Just
an excuse. It's just an excuse because he's afraid. He's scared. And he doesn't want to deal with it. And so what is he going to do? He's going to blame something else on the problem. He's going to justify in his mind as like, they'll probably like being vampires. The place is fucked anyway. Why bother doing anything? And this is, a kind of defeatist attitude that I think King entirely disagrees with. And I think all of his characters disagree with that.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's repeating myself, but like the idea that people enjoy watching movie violence means that they would enjoy real violence is the connection he's making. And it's like, no, obviously not. You idiot. Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's perfect. Like there's like Mark Petrie just saw a man get eaten to death by rats, theoretically. Right.
Yeah.
And now
on the earth where the rose is located. That's what happened.
Yes, there you go. And now this lawman who is running away from the town is telling him, well, I saw that moving picture where them Wild Bunch boys shot each other up, and so obviously the whole world's fucked. And you're just like, dude, no.
It's especially grating because, I mean, it's also kind of hilarious, darkly hilarious that he of all the people in the town is like, yeah, I figured it out. It's vampires. Yeah. And you're like, what the fuck? Like you figured this out also, and you're just doing what have you done? Nothing apparently. Like just sitting here waiting for the sun to go down. And I guess you're just gonna run now.
Yeah, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. Yeah. I think it's really important to what King is kind of saying at the end of this novel, though. This is this idea that this is where the authority of the country sits on these kind of issues. It's just like it's some other problem. We're fucked anyway. Shrug.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a great connection because, you know, a few times in this book we've had instances where the authority figures tangentially come into the story and they're just sort of bounce out of it again.
Yeah.
And it's just they're not really equipped to deal with the actuality of evil. See, earlier in the book, I was saying they're not equipped to deal with the supernatural, which might also be true. It might be part of what King's saying, but it's also kind of interesting to consider that they're really just not equipped to deal with evil. Like, I don't know, like you really said something a minute ago that really stuck in my head, and I was like processing it in the background, and what it is like, it's kind of heavy to say, but like the culture was so concerned about us not playing violent video games and being exposed to bad things. And then after 9/11 happened, nobody ever like talked to me about how I felt about that ever. That was like one of the most traumatic things that ever happened to like a whole generation.
Yeah.
And we never talked about it. It just, and it's like, what do you mean it happened to you, Matt? It's like, well, I felt connected to that. Like that was a horrible, horrible thing to see.
Yeah.
On live television, you know?
I think we've talked about this before on the show, but also we were both 17-year-old boys that were like, I was like, oh my God, like we're going to war and I'm going to get drafted. Like that's where my brain went as well. So like you take the trauma of the event and then add the fear of the unknown on top of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just contrasting the idea that like the culture, society, the powers that be were fixated on this, like, this flag they could wave, just like children shouldn't be exposed to bad thing. And then when like a terrible thing happens, they react in the dumbest way possible, basically. And like, there's no, I don't know. I'm connecting weird. Maybe these things don't make sense to connect, but to me, it's this perfect example of how, yeah, like if you, even if they had involved the authorities, they would have reacted in some stupid, destructive way that didn't actually address the evil at all.
Yeah. Like the invading Iraq version of vampire hunting.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And I think this goes perfectly in line with the Father Callahan response to it, right? This need to go after the big capital E evil instead of just dealing with the small, everyday, mundane evils of life and existence, right? Acknowledging those evils, processing those evils, and working to cure the world of those evils. Instead, no, we want the big boogeyman. We want the video game. We like to understand why someone would do something as terrible as like Columbine or 9/11 is complex and difficult to process, right? Like these are not simple boogeymen. It's not vampires. Like we don't live in a world where there are just vampires, right? These are people that have a series of mundane bad things or evils that they do or have done. It's complicated, and it is very much easier to look at the boogeyman, the vampire, than deal with the overall problem of Discordia itself, right? And that's, the law people are uninterested in doing that. The priest is uninterested in doing that. And even when he has the big capital E evil, he can't succeed. But
I love that about this book. The reason why he can't succeed about the capital E evil is that he failed to fight the lowercase e evil.
Yeah.
Right. Like if he had been the kind of priest who actually helped people, that's where you support the white. That's what the white is. You keep, people from becoming monsters by helping them.
Yeah.
Right.
Would a town without this kind of underbelly, would a town where the priest is, doing something when a woman comes to him and says she's abusing her child, when a man is telling about a murder, when there's a person like Larry Crockett that's like operating a fraud scheme with impunity, like would the capital E evil be able to get its roots in a town like that? And I think the answer, I mean, it's not cut and dry, but I think what King is trying to say is no. Like if you truly practice the white in everyday life, then the darkness cannot get a hold.
Yeah, I think there had to be a lot of people who were kind of open to it. And then also Barlow specifically says, like, your town has this sort of specific quality that vampires are hungry for, which is this pervasive darkness. Yeah.
I love it. All right, that was another kind of tangent, but at least a more more on topic tangent.
Yeah.
I don't even remember where we were. Okay, here we go. So before heading back to Barlow, our two remaining stake slingers, you see what head to the church. They douse themselves in holy water and bring some extra vials. They're stopped by Callahan's maid, who, interestingly, sees him in a little bit of a different light than we do. She looks up to him and sees him as this holy, perfect example of the power of the church, and she knows that he was doing some holy purpose, and despite his drinking, he was a priest. So is she just blind, or what was the reading of this to you?
I mean, if I set aside my knowledge of the Dark Tower, and if I assume Callahan is indeed not on his way to some great destiny, but is actually just a failure, then I have to say maybe, she's just blind. Like I think that she is meant to depict the failure mode of putting all of your faith in the hands of a man, putting your faith in the hands of a man rather than in the white, in goodness. And maybe also kind of the failure mode in thinking that Callahan's a priest. He's a holy warrior, but me, no, I'm just a woman. I'm just a person. I have my own measure of faith, but I can't be put to any real use. I'm just going to sit here in the church and be frightened and pray and Father Callahan will handle it for me. Like that's a different kind of abdication.
Yeah, this idea that merely because he is a priest, he is better, holier, like more able to handle this than I am.
Yeah,
I like that. I also like this paragraph right here. There was no surprise left on this dream-struck day. There was not even the capacity for it. They no longer saw themselves as doers or avengers or saviors. The day had absorbed them. Helplessly, they were only living. I like this, right? Like we kind of talked about how revenge had consumed them last week. But it kind of doesn't even become about revenge anymore for them, right? This is just life now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of clarity to their purpose as they proceed from this point, which I think actually seems to help them. Like the fact that they don't have a lot of self-talk going on, they're just doing it. That actually seems to be to their advantage. Yeah,
no, I agree. It allows maybe their purpose to crystallize and holify. Yeah. All right, so they head back down to Barlow's cellar, and here's the Emperor of Ice Cream moment we talked about earlier. As he slipped and scraped his way down the board Mark had set up to get out of the cellar, all he felt was an unnatural glacial calm. He saw that his hands were glowing, as if wreathed in ghost gloves. It did not surprise him. Let B be finale of Seam. The only emperor is the Emperor of Ice Cream. So here it is again.
Love it. And we have the white touching them here at the end.
Yeah.
The child and the artist receiving the full blessing of the white, walking into a danger they fully understand with no particular intent beyond doing what needs to be done, ending the evil for the sake of those who remain. And this is the most overt sign of the white that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get even more so here in a minute, because the two working quickly find the door to the root cellar. In the cellar, it has a lock on it, but Ben douses an axe in holy water, and we get this. And when he set his hands on the wooden haft, the grip felt incredibly good, incredibly right. Power seemed to have welded his flesh into its present grip. He stood holding it for a moment, looking at the shining blade, and some curious impulse made him touch it to his forehead. A hard sense of sureness clasped him, a feeling of inevitable rightness, of whiteness. For the first time in weeks, he felt he was no longer groping through fogs of belief and unbelief, sparring with a partner whose body was too insubstantial to sustain blows. The cold blue fire had crept down the axe hand and spread up his arms until he seemed to be working in a column of fire. His head was twisted to one side, the muscles of his neck corded with strain, one eye open and glaring, the other squeezed shut. The back of his shirt had split between the straining wings of his shoulder blades, and the muscles writhed beneath the skin like ropes. He was a man taken over, possessed, and Mark saw without knowing, or having to know, that the possession was not in the least Christian. The good was more elemental, less refined. It was ore, like something coughed up out of the ground in naked chunks. There was nothing finished about it. It was force. It was power. It was whatever moved the greatest wheels of the universe. So, wow. Wow. Lots to talk about there, I think.
Yeah, kind of shocking to me how clear and direct King's understanding and depiction of the white as a supernatural conceit of the setting is this early in his career. When he talks about great wheels of the universe turning, you think about the tower, and there's a lot of stuff that we learn like later, like the white's the magic that creates order out of discordia, and the white is the rose, and the white is the tower, and all that. But like fundamentally, this is like the most fundamental depiction of the white, because the rose and the tower are sort of symbols or metaphors. This is the white almost taking a hand in things in a way that it doesn't really do, that I can recall, at least not this directly.
Yeah, there's two things that I really want to focus on here. I mean, obviously, like, the whiteness is perfect. I don't even think in his mind he had dubbed this force the white yet. I think in his mind he's just thinking of the contrast between black and white, between good and evil, right? And so when he has to put a name to what this force is, he calls it whiteness. And of course, you're right. He will form that into the white as an overarching Stephen King metaverse concept later in his career. Not quite there yet, but this is the beginning of it for sure.
Yeah,
and I love the idea that the idea that he no longer has any wrestling between belief and unbelief. Like, this is the difference between Ben and Father Callahan here, right? Like, in Father Callahan, there was doubt, there was uncertainty, there was unbelief that he was wrestling with. There's none of that here. He knows without a doubt, this is what he is supposed to be doing. This is the right thing. This is the good thing. This is the white thing. For the first time in weeks, he felt he was no longer groping through fogs of belief and unbelief, sparring with a partner whose body was too unsubstantial to sustain blows. He has no doubt. He has no, or it's almost as if it's not even that just belief won. It's that argument doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. Like what is or is not doesn't matter anymore, because B is the finale of Seam.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just what is.
Yeah. It's just irrelevant. It's just, this is what we're doing now. And there doesn't need to be a lot of justification. It is obvious. It is self-justified, self-evident.
Yeah. And I mean, he's moving it beyond Christianity here officially. We kind of have been going back and forth about whether we thought, like, is the boss of Barlow Satan himself? Like, is it the Christian Satan? Is there the Christian God? And we're seeing here, no, not really. Like, which is not to say there's none of the white in Christianity, but it is something beyond that, more primal, more elemental, as it says here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I would guess that within King's universe, Satan is kind of a story that connects back to like the Crimson King and Discordia more than, so you could say, he's a servant of the Crimson King. He's a servant of Discordia, which is what Satan is, like it's all metaphors. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. All right, now it's finally time for the final confrontation. They find Barlow's coffin. It's back in the root cellar with all of the vampires of Eva Miller's boarding house sleeping at its feet. They take the coffin out of the root cellar, and it is strangely light, which is a touch I liked. Like they were like, "Oh, there's no way we'll be able to pick this up," and it's strangely light to them. It's like they've been empowered. They've leveled up,
mm-hmm.
and they can. I think Mark says he could lift it with a finger. Is what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought this was really cool. Like they get this surge of power. Of course, it doesn't persist so overwhelmingly that it just makes this easy for them, but it is really kind of awesome to see this force take hold of them.
Yeah, and in a last-ditch effort, we hear the sleeping Barlow manages to open his eyes and hypnotize Mark Petrie. It's kind of our Frodo puts the ring on moment. Mm-hmm. Ben is forced to knock him out, and so he must finish this whole thing alone.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on this turn?
This is great. I mean, it's so painful to watch because, Mark attacks Ben, which is hard to watch, and then Ben is forced to like punch the kid out, which is awful, right? Because like Mark is taking physical, he's got punched in the face by an adult, like he's not doing great. But then also like you realize, or at least I was thinking, this is yet another attempt by Barlow to attack and break the spirit and the will of the attackers.
Yeah,
because it's not about, he didn't think Mark was going to kill Ben. Like I think what it is having to punch the child in the face, I think is kind of what breaks the raiment of the white, because the Ben starts to get upset, and then that's when the white starts to kind of leave them, and then it's just a man with a stick. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. It is a really, I mean, Barlow's good at what he does, right? And I mean, even after this, he's still trying to get in Ben's head, but Ben manages to resist him only barely, right? It's not like if this had gone on for a few more seconds, Ben would have been in his thrall too. I mean, it's like, it is, it gets us back to the Star Wars question, like, is the dark side stronger? It does feel like, at least in these moments, that the power of the darkness, the power of Discordia, is really fucking strong. And even like the symbol, the avatar of the white here barely overcomes it. Just by the skin of his teeth, really.
Yeah, it's like you have to be, the white relies on having worthy people able to sort of use it and channel it. And, if there hadn't been a Ben Mears and maybe more specifically a Mark Petrie in the town, then I think the town would have just had no hope at all. Yeah,
I think you're right. So Ben does manage to resist just long enough to grab his stake and his hammer. And just as Barlow wakes up, I love this line here. There was a booming, triumphant laugh. Barlow was sitting up in his coffin, those red eyes flashing with hellish triumph. They locked with Ben's, and he felt the will draining away from him. But he strikes. Just before the will is gone, he strikes and hammers in the stake, and Barlow's cocky laughing suddenly turns into begging. I love this. No, let me go. Like the desperation of this egotistical, overconfident evil that immediately turns to a child himself, kind of like begging, let me go. No, I won't stand for it. This can't be. It's really wonderful.
It's great. Yeah.
So the Barlow dies, and he, unlike the rest of the vampires, actually does turn to dust. The only dusting in Salem's lot is the main man himself. So what were your thoughts on this whole final confrontation here, Matt?
I thought it was great. It flowed. It worked for me. It made sense. It was impactful. You can buy it. Barlow had planned ahead, so he's enough of a chess player to have caught one of their pieces in a pin, but those who remained did have the steel to see it through. And I think I also want to say, like, it wasn't like fun or awesome. Like it's only awesome in the sense of awe, where there's these really awe-filled moments when the white comes over them, and it just feels big and important and heavy, and I really liked it. It's also kind of harrowing and horrible, the way he used Mark against Ben, and it feels very earned.
It does. I mean, and it's also not like a big fight. It's just it's over very quickly, which is, I think, a theme that we've seen in King, that when our characters finally come in their confrontation against evil, it never quite goes the way maybe you're thinking in your head that this big climactic confrontation is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you can contradict me, but it does seem at this point, having read what I've read of King, that his climactic battle scenes are usually, anticlimactic. They're usually just a sort of example of like, actually when violence happens, it tends to happen really quickly.
Yeah.
And violently, actually, and then it's over. And I mean, he explores it fully, but it's not a long sort of back and forth, right?
And also there's this interesting thing, we just talked about, how powerful is the evil, the discordia, the blackness of the world, and how powerful and overwhelming and completely disabilitating and destructive that power can be. But the interesting thing is, whenever goodness, the white, and the avatar of such directly confronts evil, it usually just fucking blows it away, right? Like there's this idea that the evil that exists in this world works because it intimidates and manipulates and maybe even hypnotizes the good people into complacency. Like the old I'm going to go back to the most cliche quote ever, but like the only thing that evil requires to flourish is the good men do nothing, right? Like this is like when it actually in like a head-to-head like fight, evil in these books of Stephen King's is just kind of disappointing and gets its ass kicked.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't subsist on that. It subsists on its ability to manipulate the people around it to not getting into those kind of confrontations. Because like they didn't beat Barlow here because they outplayed him in chess, right? Like there was no strategic decision here that they like got him in check. They just brute forced it. They just threw people at him until he had no more defenses, and then they just like beat him to death. Like that's like there was no plan here. They just went down there, and it's just like evil cannot stand against this kind of thing when you bring goodness fully to bear against it.
Yeah, they just had to be willing to do it. They just had to have the will.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it is when you bring the will to fight evil, that is not all that's needed, but maybe sort of all that's needed, because if your will really is sufficient, then that will cause you to find the solution.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But yeah, I love this idea that so many of the villains are kind of paper tigers, except for their particular ability to manipulate other weak people into doing their bidding.
Yeah,
that's really really a big theme of King's, and I think a very kind of good message for people to think about.
Yeah, and not to spoil anything, but we're gonna see that again and again and again.
Okay.
And again. Yeah, like this is definitely a commonality of the antagonists in King's works. Yeah,
makes sense.
All right, so the two escape the cellar, safe from the other vampires due to the holy water. I think that's a really nice touch, where the other vampires are just there, but first of all, they can't touch them because of the holy water, and second of all, they're just kind of in a state of shock.
Yeah,
we're like, you killed the master.
Yeah, what? Right. I mean, they seem very much subhuman here. Like we haven't spent a ton of time with the normal vampires, but they're just kind of slow, and none of them is like taking charge. They're not people anymore. They're just barely functional shadows of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the end of chapter 14, The Lot. We move on to chapter 15, Ben and Mark, in which our two surviving quartet members head out of town and check into a hotel. We get a really like brief as they leave town. King like once again does one of those just incredibly amazing like overviews of the town, which ends on this line that I just love. The town kept its secrets, and the Marston house brooded over it like a ruined king. Just, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. But Ben is not done in Salem's Lot quite yet, Matt, because he returns to the town the next day. He goes back down into the basement and drags Jimmy Cody's body out of there and gives him a proper burial. which is very nice of him. But that's not the only thing he does. He burns the manuscript of his novel that he was writing in Salem's Lot, and then he destroys the paperweight. The paperweight that we will remember is the thing he took from the Marston house when he was a child and had that traumatic experience. It was kind of like a symbol of the trauma that held itself over him for all these years. And he takes that and throws it in a corner and smashes it, symbolically releasing himself from that trauma. But I want to talk about this a little bit, right? Because I think there's a really interesting paragraph in here that we got to discuss.
Sure.
He did it now, holding it up before his eyes as he had a little boy, and it did its old trick. Through the floating snow, you could see a little gingerbread house with a path leading up to it. The gingerbread shutters were closed, but as an imaginative boy, as Mark Petrie was now, you could fancy that one of the shutters was being folded back, as indeed one of them seemed to be folding back now, by a long, white hand, and then a pallid face would be looking out at you, grinning with long teeth, inviting you into the house beyond its world, in its slow and endless fantasy land of false snow, where time was a myth. The face was looking out at him now, pallid and hungry, a face that would never look on daylight or blue skies again. It was his own face. So, there's a lot there, Matt. Yeah. I want to get your read on it.
Well, first of all, I found it a bit surprising that this scene was even here with him returning to the town.
Okay.
I was kind of nervous that something bad would happen the whole time, but should have known that it wouldn't. That was just kind of a silliness of my part. But yeah, no, I want to interpret that for sure. So like, it's just a great kind of horror stinger, sans any interpretation. It's just
sure.
It's just incredibly creepy visual. And it makes me want to sell a line of snow globes that have a little tiny mechanized window that opens slowly to reveal a pallid, hungry face. One in every 100 times you shake the globe.
We got to do this merch. We need more merch. We still got to do it for if you podcast me, then podcast me mug. Now we got to get spooky snow globes.
Yeah. Anybody knows how to make a really microscopically tiny window open on a snow globe? Let me know. But yeah, so I don't think we're meant to take it literally. Like Ben is literally seeing the snow globe magically.
No,
it's not a cursed snow globe. It's symbolic, right? But so what I see it as is like the evil of the Marston house, the evil of Barlow, the capital E evil that exists in the world is maybe reaching out and touching Ben, or maybe Ben feels like it has reached out and touched him and claimed him and cursed him, and because he has led this kind of cursed life, right?
Yeah,
he's been a very unfortunate person, and that was the first thing that came to my mind. Did you have a read on this great ending moment?
I think that's right. I think I'm going to take it one step further, and the cursed life is related to this image of a world trapped in glass where there is no such thing as time. This, the part of this that really got to me was inviting you into this house beyond the world in its slow and endless fantasy land of false snow where time was a myth, right? I mean, and this is, if we remember, this is the initial reason why Ben is returning to Salem's Lot, right? This idea of nostalgia, this idea of returning to a place where time is a myth, where I can, find my true self, my pure self, wrap myself in the nostalgia of my youth, and also confront the one traumatic event of my past. This idea that I can come back here and everything will be good and the same again. And I think at the end of this book, Mark is, or Ben rather, is fully cognizant of the fact that that's an illusion. It's a dodge. It's destructive and evil. That idea, and that's represented by this grinning, long-teethed, pale-faced monster inviting him in. That is him. That is a version of him. That if he succumbs to that kind of thing, that kind of nostalgic pull of the past, that it will destroy him ultimately.
And a vampire kind of is a creature that is stuck in the past.
Exactly.
It's a creature that is fixed at a certain point in time.
Yeah. They do not change. They cannot grow. They cannot learn. Yeah. They cannot evolve. They cannot change.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly representative. It's the idea of nostalgia personified.
Yeah. This is so often a theme in vampire stories is this idea of like, you know, it's seductive. You get to be young and beautiful forever. Isn't this great? And then you get it and you realize like, well, that's all you have now.
Yeah.
Is being young and beautiful. You have nothing else.
Yeah, I wish there was like a whole TV show about like where the show was about growing up and then the vampires were used as a metaphor for what not growing up is. I wish that existed, but I'm
staring at the camera now.
This is why we need to stream our recording sessions, just so you can do that.
Yeah.
For those that maybe didn't follow that, I was of course talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of course.
Yeah.
You know, if you're allowed to bring up Lord of the Rings in every single episode of our previous podcast, I think I'm allowed to reference a vampire thing in this vampire book.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, definitely. No, I don't know. It's funny because like I said, I was surprised that he went back to the town. I was like, that's an interesting choice. But then like, I can't imagine this book without this bit you just pulled out about the snow globe. It's so good.
It brings everything back around, because I mean, that's one of the things that like, I think that the early parts of this book hit the nostalgia thing so heavily. And then we kind of lose it a little bit throughout the meat of the book. And I think this is bringing it around full circle, and it needed this moment.
Yeah,
I think for sure.
You're right.
All right. So that is the end of the book proper. Let's move on to our epilogue. Our epilogue, just like every other section of this book, opens with a couple of poems. Both are from our Greek poet that we've seen a few times throughout the story, George Sepphoris. The first is a section from Mythostorema. I could have said that better. I think it's a poem, an epic poem that I think King pulled from earlier in the book as well.
Okay.
But here it is. Among these decimated villages, upon this headland naked to the south wind, with the trail of mountains before us, hiding you, who will reckon upon our decision to forget? Who will accept our offering at this end of autumn? So, any idea there, Matt?
Well, we're at an ending. We're trying to put the past behind us. We're trying to forget. We've got a journey ahead of us. Yep. I mean, once again, I feel like this is being chosen for sort of the feeling that it evokes, and there's almost certainly more that could be dug out of it. But on a first pass, it's about the tone and the feeling.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is a very long poem that King has taken this from. So like, whenever you're taking 5 lines, one stanza from an extremely long poem, I think we can kind of move away from let's interpret this entire poem and see what it has to say specifically. I think you're right that the imagery that's being called up here, among these decimated villages, upon this headland naked to the south wind, with the trail of mountains before us hiding you. These are people like have gone on a journey and are returning to the decimated villages of the town. Who will reckon upon our decision to forget? Who will accept our offering at this end of autumn? And the offering, of course, is they're literally going to set the town on fire. That like they're making an offering of fire to cleanse the town. Yeah, I think it's perfectly fitting, and I think you're right. This is more the way that words make you feel than like, is there some clue to this poem that unlocks a theme for us? No, not really. Not really. But maybe this one is worth a little bit more conversation, because here's another George Sepphoris. I think this is another haiku, or it would be a haiku if it was in its original Greek. I think I counted, and I don't think there's a 5.
Not even close in English,
no,
but
no. Now she's eyeless. The snakes she held once eat up her hands. Any ideas on this one?
Well, is this like explicitly a Medusa reference?
I don't know, Matt. I don't know.
Kind of seems like a Medusa reference, but beyond it being a Medusa reference, I'm not sure who is the she here, or I don't know. What am I missing, Scott?
I'm not like it's poetry, man. There's no answer. The idea here, now she's eyeless, the snake she held once eat up her hands. This is kind of
maybe not Medusa.
No, it doesn't quite work. I mean, you hear Medusa, you hear Greek poet, or you hear snakes, it's a Greek poet. I think you cannot be blamed for your mind immediately going Medusa, but I think, I don't know. I like the idea of like the snakes she held once eat up her hands. This is something that a weapon maybe that I was holding that has turned on me, right? And maybe what we're saying here is like the maybe perhaps the the fire that ravaged the town in the 50s is now the fire that will cleanse the town in the 70s.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. That's better than I can do.
That's the best I got. That's the best I got.
It's just interesting because I mean I do love poetry. I'm hung up on like, okay, she's eyeless, like that's a great word choice, but why not just say blind? And it's like I'm not saying like he should have said blind. I'm saying, why did he say eyeless instead of blind? Right?
Yeah.
It's a specific. It's a specific choice, and I don't know what it means.
I did some like cursory searching around for this one, and I just didn't hit on anything solid. Like when you search for this poem on Google, you find Salem's Lot. Like that's just like the top search is Salem's Lot. So there's not a lot here that could have like helped me get to an interpretation of what we mean. I don't know. I mean, you could kind of go back. You could assume that the she in this thing is the same she that was in the earlier ones. We were talking about the God, what's her name? It was Persephone, but like the queen of the damned or something.
Yeah, the queen of the damned. Yeah, right.
So maybe we could say that this is the same she as that earlier, not haiku.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm also just like okay, last take. She's someone who previously held snakes safely, but now she's blind, and now the snakes have turned on her because she can no longer see them. She can no longer be wary of them properly.
Sure.
You play with fire to make it maybe more literally, and it ends up burning you if you're not paying attention. I don't know.
You turn a blind eye to evil, and evil will consume you.
Yeah. Okay.
But what does that have necessarily to do with the specific events of the epilogue? I don't know.
I don't feel like we nailed this one in, but I don't have anything else.
Hey, listeners, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
Let us know what you think about this haiku.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people better at poetry than us will have some great interpretations.
Yeah, love to understand it better.
Yeah. All right. So our epilogue itself sees us return to the tall man and the boy from the prologue. But first, we see some epistolary paper clippings from the Portland Press Herald showing us that the events in Salem's Lot have continued to deteriorate in Ben and Mark's absence. Now that we're at the end of the book, why do you think King uses this style, outside of just that's what Dracula did?
I mean, it's catching us up. It's reminding us kind of where we are. It's reminding us of the prologue. It's advancing the plot through time also, because I think that the clips tell a story, actually. There's a sense, to me anyway, that the vampires have gotten more desperate, that maybe they've gotten more bold due to their desperation. They're kind of, they're resorting to eating animals. They're resorting to running cars off the road. They've had to travel further afield. But it kind of doesn't seem like they're able to leave Salem's Lot fully.
Yeah.
So it does tell a bit of a story, and I like that.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, there's not a lot here of like how effective are vampires without their master, but like it does seem that if Barlow had been left alive, things would not have ended up quite like this. Like, it's more likely this spreads than it stays contained, but it just seems like they're more animals than anything else that are just kind of existing in town and spreading out looking for food, but just kind of chilling, because you can't leave Salem's Lot. You can't, even if you're a vampire, you can never leave.
Of course not. I wonder, I mean, I assume that with Barlow dead, they can still spread the vampirism, but I don't actually know that to be true. So
I mean, I think the answer to that is yes, based on what we know, because we know that Ralphie Glick made his mom a vampire.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. Yeah. I'll leave that. I'll buy it.
Yeah. I do like how, like, after this epistolary part, King like specifically uses the tall man and the boy moniker again for like one brief section of the story, kind of goes, as you said, goes back to that same tone from the prologue, and then the same names or references from the prologue, kind of maybe connecting the dots for those that for some reason hadn't said, oh yes, those two men, the tall man and the boy, were indeed Ben and Mark Petrie.
Right.
But it's just a really great connecting device, I think.
Yeah, I loved it.
So Ben and Mark head back into the lot, and King kind of shows us how the town is doing, and it's not well, Matt. I really, really like this part here. Further up the street, he pulled into the curb and looked into the park. The war memorial presided over a jungle-like growth of bushes and grass. The wading pool had been choked by summer water weeds. The green paint on the benches was flaked and peeling. The swing chains had rusted, and to ride one would produce squealing noises unpleasant enough to spoil the fun. The slippery slide had fallen over and lay with its legs sticking stiffly out like a dead antelope. And perched in one corner of the sailbox, a floppy arm trailed on the grass, was some child's forgotten Raggedy Andy doll. Its shoe-button eyes seemed to reflect black, vapid horror, as if it had seen all the secrets of the darkness during its long stay in the sandbox. Perhaps it had.
Oh, God, that's great. That's so great. You know, there's... Go ahead.
No, go.
I was going to say, like, I was reflecting on the fact that there's some authors where I'll just skim and borderline skip their setting descriptions. And I regret to say that George R. R. Martin is one of these, where when he gets into describing, like, feasts and castle ramparts and heraldry, I just switch over into skim mode. It's just not my thing. But like, I'm always totally here for King's descriptive writing because it's beautiful and it's haunting and it paints a picture that sticks with you. And I think he only really does descriptive writing when it's something that deserves to be described.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the choice here to like the emphasis on this is a place for children and it's been run over and consumed and dead, you know, like this idea that like, and I think maybe that's part of what has happened to Mark Petrie here, right? Is that his childhood has been consumed by the same darkness that the Raggedy Andy doll has bared witness to while hanging out in the sandbox. Yeah. It's creepy. It's wonderful. And I agree with you. I think King's descriptions, they're fun to read. They're fun to read aloud. Like I love pulling this stuff out. Like half the fun of the show to me is just getting to read aloud these beautiful, beautiful passages. And I know I'm not the best reader, but I do it because it's fun for me. Yeah. And hopefully you guys at home enjoy it too.
It is fun. Just fun to read out loud. Mm-hmm. It's a pleasure that I didn't know about until I was older.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. I can't wait to read it to my kid. My son was being very, very fussy and I'm reading Dracula right now. And so I read a couple pages of Dracula to him. And I was having trouble focusing because every time I started reading, he'd get this big giant smile on his face, even though I'm talking about like the horror of Count Dracula. It was the dichotomy of that situation was not doing well with my ability to actually read, but it was fun.
That's incredibly cool.
Yeah. So they leave the town proper and walk into the woods, back to where the fire of 1951 had started. They're going to light another fire here, Matt, one that will hopefully this time purify the town. And I love this line here. Tonight, they won't be running sheep or visiting farms, Ben said softly. Tonight, they'll be on the run. And tomorrow, you and me, Mark said, and closed his fist. His face was no longer pale. Bright color glowed there. His eyes flashed. And so it was the fire that originally drove Ben Mears from Salem's Lot as a child, and it is with fire that he announces his return to it. And that is the end of the book, Matt. There it is. So what do you think of this decision to come back and set a fire to kind of clear out the vampires?
Well, number one, I felt like I should have seen it coming because the whole fire thing. I thought the fire was going to come into play, but I didn't think that it was going to be used by the good guys, I guess. I think sure. I did at some point earlier in the book have this notion of like the town burning again. Mm-hmm. But I didn't put together that was what they would do, that they'd return and do that. So that was cool. I mean, it feels like a great symmetry because like you said earlier, the reason why he left the town originally was because of the fire, and mm-hmm. then the fire has a chance to purify the evil, and I guess maybe in a sense finish what it started. I don't know. It's this is a bit of a reach, but like the hero who saved the town from the fire, wasn't he the guy who like fell into the threshing machine?
Yeah, it was Eva Miller's husband. Yeah. And so it's kind of like maybe that was the universe being like, you shouldn't have saved this town. You should have let it burn. You're not supposed to help her.
You weren't supposed to help. Yeah. I don't know. That's just more of a funny thought than a serious thought. But I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, maybe that's what this town need. Like, the thing is that the town didn't change, right? And what is fire but a representative of change? Like, that is, like, in nature, fire will burn through forests in order to burn out the rot and the dead and bring forth new life, right? And so, you need a cleansing fire every so often.
Yeah.
And that's what they're here to bring to Salem's Lot at last.
Right. I mean, there's also a metaphorical level on which it's like, if you shouldn't build your town in a place where there is a constant danger of devastating wildfire burning up your town. Like,
California.
I mean, I was trying not to be a dick about it, but like, because I know, I mean, even in the place where I live, like in the I guess the summer, in the summer, like there gets to be like,
you guys have a lot of fires out there.
Yeah, there gets to be like dead grasses, but the thing about that is like the fire just kind of sweeps through the dead grass and burns the dead grass, and that's kind of it. I mean, I think they do fight the fires, but I don't think it would become a city destroying blaze if they didn't fight the fires. I think it's just part of the cycle of nature. Whereas it seems like Salem's Lot metaphor. Okay, so the metaphor I'm trying to get to is like, they're a town that has unsound foundations. They're a town that is letting the kindling of literal kindling and also the kindling of all of the heinous shit that's happening, that they're turning a blind eye to, build up around them until a spark ignites, and just, and the vampire is the spark, or and burns up the town with evil.
I think you're onto something there. I do. I do think it's like one of the greatest ironies of like being a human, that some of the best places for us to settle also happen to be like floodplains. Great place for human beings to settle. A great place, like vegetation, like food growth, like a great place for human beings to settle. Also though, floods. Like the reason why it's a great place for vegetation and agriculture and stuff is the same reason why it's an unsafe place. And so there's this constant kind of like, we go to the places that are best for us but are also simultaneously the worst for us.
Yeah Liminal spaces, man.
Yeah, definitely. So that's it. That's the end of the book. We leave Ben Mears and Mark Petrie knowing that they're going to become professional vampire hunters, or at least until every vampire in the town of Salem's Lot has been cleansed. And we don't know much about them other than we do, through the story of Callahan and Wolves of the Calla, get to see the funeral of Ben Mears. Callahan does appear at Ben's funeral, much years and years later. But that's really all we get of it. Cool. I'm curious, like, it'd be fun to go back and reread that section in particular now that you know who Mark Petrie and Ben Mears are.
Yeah, I would like to do that, actually. I think I will.
Cool. All right, but that is the end of Salem's Lot. One down, many more to go. Matt, how does it feel? You've now read 8 Stephen King novels.
Feels good, man. I mean, with each one that I read, I feel like I have one more data point that allows me to say a bit more confidently what he's trying to say, what his strengths are, analyze a little bit more clearly. Yeah. And I mean, I really like this one. I once again, like, it's so kind of remarkable that this is the second book, because I'm sure we'll talk about this at great length in the review, in the overview episode, but like, it's my kind of book, because like it all comes together thematically, plot wise, character wise. Everything's designed correctly, without feeling kind of overwrought and overcooked, which I think I felt like Ghost Story did.
Poor Ghost Story.
To just sort of, I mentioned that here not just to make a pointless swipe, but because that was a book that felt very similar to Salem's Lot. Sort of felt like it was trying to do a similar thing.
Sure. But
I did not enjoy nearly as much, and like just didn't have the touch that Stephen King has. Yeah. I
agree with you. We'll talk more about that next week. Yes. But it's cool to be done. It's cool to be finished with one book. I'm so glad we got to read this book this way.
Me too.
But more on that next week. For now, let's talk about this week's discussion question, which was in honor of us finishing the book Salem's Lot. Who is your favorite Salem's Lot character and Why?
Yeah. First, from Walk and Do 22. I am fond of all the characters in this book, and for the most part, they land on the same level. They all feel like products of a young writer. Yet, one does rise above the others. My favorite character is Barlow. I remember how surprised I was on my first read-through by Barlow's humanity. I was expecting the Nosferatu-inspired, front-fanged beast from the movie. When I got instead was an educated and crafty villain with very human motivations like arrogance and vengeance. Yes, he's a monster, and yes, he should be stopped, but I just love him. I think the reason he didn't just kill Mark is because he desired to make Mark his new striker. I see an antique shop named Barlow and Petrie opening somewhere in the Midwest, early in the 21st century. Of course, Gan seldom fulfills our character's dreams. He can be a harsh and indifferent turtle. Oh man, that's a creepy thought.
Yes, yes, it is.
Oh, this is one thing I thought about today was the fact that one of the reasons why, you could really buy this ending, like buy that they were able to defeat Barlow, is that they had already killed Straker, and he probably really relied on Straker during the daylight hours.
Yeah, more so than he was willing to admit, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, this is a wrinkle of the vampire lore that I just find really fascinating. Like, I understand the I am awake at night and asleep during the day thing, but like, I know you can't see sun, but like, couldn't you just have like not slept? Like, but I mean, the thing is, no, that like they cannot exist during the daylight, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, I'm just like, this is my nap time.
Right.
This is it. They're creatures that must hide away during daylight hours.
I mean, I think in some versions, like they're not asleep during the day, they're dead during the day.
Yeah.
And their undeath only kind of returns to them in the night. So
yeah. Which is interesting because a lot of other vampire literature have taken that and twisted it to just like they're just like us at nighttime, where they're like, sometimes they'll sleep, sometimes they'll stay up late and watch TV. Right. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Because that kind of removes their weakness. Like the only reason they won here is because they were able to get to him during the time when he was defenseless.
Right. Depends on what kind of story you're telling, but definitely makes sense to give them this serious weakness. Yeah.
All right, we have Pear Jane next, who says, okay, on to my favorite character. While Pear Callahan is one of my favorite characters in the Dark Tower series, check my name, I'm less enamored with Father Callahan for all the reasons you've already covered. So my favorite's an easy one, Mark Petrie. One of my favorite character traits is simple competence. I always find presence of mind to be supremely satisfying. Mark is clever and quick to act. He calculates his next move in an instant and is able to act on it in time to affect the result he wants. He starts with the bully and doesn't stop, even after his parents are murdered in front of him. I often wonder what his relationship with Ben was like. I'm guessing Mark was in charge more often than not. Some of my favorite small moments in movies are similar presence of mind, survival instinct moments. In Black Panther, when Killmonger defeats T'Challa, super spy Nakia doesn't even take a moment to grieve. She knows she has to get to the Queen Mother and Shuri out of there before shit goes down. Scott, you'll skip the spoilery bit, but yes.
But Matt's eyes immediately go white.
Also, pretty much every Marine scene in Aliens. Yes. Yeah, hypercompetence is always really fun.
Yes, I agree. It's sort of a weakness of mine, actually.
Pear Jane asks for our favorite presence of mind moments, and anyone else that's listening. Do you have any you can pull right just out of your ass?
Well, I mean, just
right now?
Since I just read Drawing of the Three, and this is a Dark Tower podcast, I mean, a ton of like both Roland and Eddie moments in that book where, it's actually kind of a plot point that like, Roland saying, or I guess it's a court quote saying like normal men only see a fraction of what they see, and whereas Roland notices everything that he sees, and this is what a gunslinger is, and so that's literally presence of mind, right? Like he's noticing all of the things that are happening, noticing the people that are following him, noticing that the stewardess, clocked to something weird going on with Eddie, sorry, not stewardess, the soldier, the female soldier is what he thought it was.
Oh yeah. I was like, wait a minute, no, it was a stewardess. Yeah. I was like, you really confused me there. I would not be listed as someone's favorite hyper competent character.
The army woman is what he calls her. The army woman. Yeah.
She's God, I love the Drawing of the Three. It's so fucking good.
That's one thing I noticed in this read through is how pervasive it is that people have the voices of their mentors talking to them. while Court is talking to Roland, her like flight danger trainer is talking to her in her head. It's great.
Yeah, it is. King likes to do that a lot. That's for sure. All right.
Next, Otherworlds 1999 says, I've only read this book one time many years ago, but I remember liking it. While I'm still enjoying this reread, I've realized that my favorite character in the book is the town. My favorite part of King's writing is always the way he fleshes out the seemingly unimportant inhabitants of a location. Give me 50 pages of character development on someone destined to die or never be heard from again any day.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want let's put a pin in this because I want to circle back around to this again next week.
Yeah.
Because I kind of agree with this sentiment, especially when it comes to this book.
Sure. I mean, that's one thing we pointed out over and over with the Dark Tower as well. There's like all these side characters who come in and I'm like, they could come back and be a major character. Maybe we'll never see him again. Yeah. I don't know. I'm happy either way.
Yeah, of course, listing the town as your favorite character is blatant cheating, and I will not stand for it. So let's read the next answer from Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, who says, this is probably cheating, but my favorite character is the lot itself. Damn it! In my copy, over 200 pages of the book are chapters titled The Lot. Ben's 4 chapters click in at about 80 pages. That's a great observation. I love that. To me, this book has always been about the town and less about the main characters. None of the characters are particularly fleshed out, with the exception of the town. I grew up in a small town and easily related to this town, more easily than I relate to any one human or vampire in the story. King did a great job capturing small town America, both in the people and the hidden underbelly. If I was forced to pick one character, it would be Mark Petrie. I was 11 years old when I read Salem's Lot, which was also my first King book, so about Mark's age. Back then, I was getting into horror movies, and this was my first grown-up book, and it scared the shit out of me. Having grown up next to a graveyard south of Pittsburgh, I was already terrified if the Romero zombies would eat me and my family. This book gave me a new nightmare to torture myself with. For months after, I made sure that my bedroom blinds were always pulled down after sunset, just in case a vampire decided to come tapping at my window.
Always a wise precaution.
Yeah. Do that now anyway, just in case.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget that my dog asked to be put out late at night, and then I'm laying in bed and I hear a tapping at our door. We have a sliding glass door in our bedroom that leads to the backyard, and it's my dog just patiently, and it's not been good some nights, so I get that for sure.
That's great.
And I'm not an 11-year-old.
That's great. Yeah. Well, you can look forward to a small figure walking around your home in the dead of night.
Oh my God.
Silently.
Yeah.
Or not quite silently, just like pad, little footsteps.
I've got a while, but yeah, him being mobile is going to be a lot.
Yep. All right. Next from Pedro Achilles. Favorite character? Barlow. He's the only person in Salem's Lot who's having any fun. Sure, it's at the expense of our heroes, but so what? The creep really knows how to party. He kills an entire town in like a week, all while taunting our protagonists. Those gloomy gusses, leaving them funny letters, making them murder their undead girlfriends, smushing their parents' heads, and just being an absolute cut-up. Sure, he's an asshole, but who would you rather have a conversation with? Ben Mears? Barlow has more personality and is disembodied yet weirdly alive and moving teeth. Yikes.
See, this is why fiction is fun, because you can do that and not have any bad feeling about it whatsoever.
I love it. That's wonderful. And you're right.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. You're absolutely right. All right, next we have Eric T, who says, first answer is maybe a cheat or a cop-out. Here we go again. But you declared the lot itself a character early on in this book, and it's my selection. Like Castle Rock and maybe Derry, though I could buy that being a whole other kettle of fish, these small towns are the perfect places to have this creepy horror infestation occur. Despite King pointing out how ugly things are there down below, initially, they really are probably, by and large, pleasant communities. Much like big cities, they have their cheapskates and cheats, addicts, and aggressive, abusive individuals, but they keep it under wraps. A kid goes missing, a dog being killed, or any other horrible things that happen would go unremarked upon in Chicago or New York in a lot of the neighborhoods, but out in the sticks, it's a shocking event. In both towns, an evil moves in, Barlow or Gaunt, and the town invites them, and the hidden bad becomes overt. Both types of locations, rural and urban, have their sordid underbellies, but rarely does the great beast roll over and allow it to be exposed to sunlight in the former. It's a loss of innocence thing, and it's a great allegory for a good person doing a bad thing. In for a penny, in for a pound. Once the moral high ground is lost, these populations descend into complete madness and mayhem at a ridiculous rate. When I asked this question, I had a feeling that people were going to say the town. And I was right.
Yeah. Well,
but I mean, no, look, it's a fair answer. And I think Baby Can You Dig Your Sam like holds it out easily. Like, so much of this book is the lot chapters. Yeah. Like the 14th chapter, the one we just spent the last 3 weeks talking about, is the majority of the book. Yeah. And King telegraphs this rather directly by calling these chapters the lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you do say that the town is the main character, then it actually makes the complexion of the book even darker, because it's like, yeah, well, the town does not survive. Ben, like we said before, Ben and Mark, the only two quote real survivors, are not natives of the town. So
yeah, that's true.
The town dies. It's wholly tragic.
Mm-hmm.
All right, finally from Jennifer D. Unlike many later stories, I find that the characters in Salem's Lot aren't very well developed. This is probably the reason that I just don't feel invested in any of them. I love Father Callahan, but only from sharing his journey in the Dark Tower. I'll admit, though, I have a soft spot for Eva and Weasel. The mutual affection they share is real and sweet. I love how she provides for him in a way that allows him to keep some self-respect despite his debilitating alcoholism. She cares for him in memory of the man who he was before he hit the bottle. It's sad and beautiful at the same time. Yeah. I was invested in their relationship. It did touch me when they both became vampires, and it was like, oh, this is a loss. I feel this loss. That's one. I mean, I have to think about whether I fully, don't. Well, I don't know. I'll just say the only way you make me care about the town is to make me care about individuals in the town, and they were definitely one of the few that I really felt invested with. So, yeah.
I mean, there's some of the few who don't have like a horrible, terrible, dark, monstrous secret. Like, yes, Weasel is a man who has a disease, but he's not functioning well, but he's not like a monster. It's just they're entirely relatable, and
yeah, right.
It's sad what happens to them.
Yeah.
All right, that is all the answers we got. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted answers to this question. The rest of you that didn't answer, hopefully you will come around to some of our later discussion questions and answer those. But for now, we have to move on to next week's question. And as always, since next week is an overview episode, we are turning things around, and you will be able to ask the questions of us. So it's going to be another one of our mailbag questions. So if we can try to keep the questions related to Salem's Lot, that would be great. But if you have some other larger questions about the Dark Tower or season 2 in general and any of that stuff, you can always reach out and ask those, or anything broadly beyond that. We like answering questions. Just let us have them.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right, that is it for us on Kingslingers. Next week, as we said, will be our overview episode, and then the week after that, we are moving on to a couple of short stories that take place within this ruined town of Salem's Lot.
That sounds very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit r/doof media is a good place to not only leave your questions for the mailbag, but also just hang out with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Please hang out there. And once again, find us on Instagram, because you'll see on my wife's amazing Instagram stories that I'm loving so much.
It's funny because I don't really peruse Instagram, but apparently I'm missing just a ton. So I'm gonna be
on there.
Yeah, right up in there. Yeah,
you gotta get on there, man. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so. It's a perfect time because we are finishing up a book and going to be moving on to another one really shortly. So make sure you subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts. We actually just hit 3,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which I know is not very many, but it is for us, especially considering we don't do any actual video content. We just put our podcast episodes up there. So if you want to give that YouTube a subscribe, that would be a good thing to do.
That would be nice. Yeah, YouTube just kind of buries audio content. So
yeah, it's so weird because YouTube had this push probably like 5 years ago where they were like, we're going to get into the podcasting game, because they used to not let you do this. They used to not let you put up audio only content on there. They wanted you to have some video component to it. And then they were like, no, we're going to do podcasts. And so they allowed all these podcasting companies to like build APIs into their things that allowed stuff like our show to automatically post to YouTube when we put it on our podcatcher. And then they just kind of said, oh, wait, we're not making any money off this. And then so they've really stopped supporting it. So the algorithms bury it. Or you do a review of a movie and someone thinks that your hour-long episode is the movie itself. And then they gets really mad at you when they click on it and they see it's not the movie.
And they leave a comment that just says, not the movie. And you're like, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
I just think it's so funny that one of our most popular episodes is a movie called Three Idiots. It's a movie from India. It's a great movie. We loved it. But like, for whatever reasons, when you search like Three Idiots on YouTube, it's like the first thing that comes up, and people see it and see that it's an hour and 20 minutes and think that it's the movie. And then they just get so mad in the comments. They just get so angry.
Yeah. There's some of these where we've changed the title of the episode to be like podcast discussion of, and it hasn't stopped it.
Yeah.
So
we did an episode on Jackie Chan's First Strike. People are very angry at that one. They're like, what the hell is this? It's a podcast.
Are you actually asking? I don't think you are. Yeah, anyways.
Pretty sure we say the word podcast in the intro. In the intro of every single episode.
Maybe they don't know what a podcast is.
That is possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway.
Enough of our ranting. Let's move on with the outro.
If you like any of our shows, including the shows that appear on YouTube, and you want to support them, then please consider donating to patreon.com/doofmedia. Got a bunch of new patrons this week. Maybe because the book is ending. I don't know. New Doof Dancers, Matthew W., Dylan T., Logan S., Jensen R., and new Doof Trooper Gracie. Awesome. Welcome. Thank you so much. We are always making bonus content for the patrons, so we hope you check that out and get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For those of you that are at the Doof Dancer level, we have our Doof and Chill session coming up. I believe it's this Friday, the 23rd. That is once a month we get together on YouTube. Hey, YouTube. And we stream live where a bunch of us from Doof Media kind of get together and just hang out for an hour. We usually play some games with listeners or do something fun. I believe this month we have two new members of our organization. So we're going to be kind of doing a Q&A session with them. But if you just want to come hang out with us for a few hours on a Friday night, that is this Friday, and it's exclusive only to our patrons. So a link will be hitting Patreon on Friday. So come hang out with us.
Yeah, can't wait.
But of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out just by sharing this podcast with everyone. Maybe like if you're going to burn a town, instead of doing that, just, tell them about the podcast, and maybe that will stop them from being evil vampires. I don't know. Has anyone ever tried it? You haven't. So how dare you say it won't work?
It's really worth a try. I agree.
Also, you can just help us out by leaving a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Omega Weapon 85, who gives us 5 stars and says, "All things serve the beam. I can't believe I just found this podcast. It's a huge bummer that I didn't find it sooner, but better late than not at all. Nevertheless, the show is really top quality. These guys know what they're doing and really put on an excellent show. The depth with which they examine my favorite book series has added an extra layer to the whole thing for me. Nice work, guys." Thank you, Omega Weapon. Omega Weapon, by the way, likes Final Fantasy, because that's from Final Fantasy.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. That's it right there. And 85, he's my age and loves Final Fantasy. Is this me? Did I leave a review?
Maybe. It's funny because I know that it's Final Fantasy, but my first thought was like, is that like an X-Men thing? But no, it's definitely. Anyway, yeah. Thank you so much for your kind words. It really means a lot.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone who has left us those rating and reviews. Keep them coming, please, because if I ever run out of reviews to read, I will be very, very, very sad. And you wouldn't like me when I'm sad.
No, you really wouldn't.
All right, folks, we will see you right back here next week for our Salem's Lot overview episode. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.